What is it like having a career? And she's like, no, 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 no. Like, Luke wants you to come exactly as you are now. Then he sat me down and said, you know, you are Leeloo, you know, you're the one I want for this. Like, didn't want me to put a stitch of makeup on, didn't, you know. So I was like, okay.
And this is?
Leeloo Dallas Multipass.
That was where I think he saw the little animal in me. Luke definitely wanted to do...
What's
she saying? I don't know.
The hair that had never been seen before. They came up with this fluorescent orange and the blonde roots.
Mila Jovovich's role in The Fifth Element didn't just make her an action star. It put her at the heart of one of the wildest behind-the-scenes stories in sci-fi history. This wasn't just another futuristic flick. It was an explosion of color, chaos, and couture that rewrote the rules of the genre. But here's the thing. Behind the flying taxis, alien opera singers, and outrageous space fashion, there's a real-life story even crazier than what made it on screen. We're talking about a teenage dream from Luc Besson that turned into one of the most expensive films of the 90s, a love story that unraveled marriage mid-production, and a now iconic multi-pass catchphrase that almost never happened. And at the center of it all, Mila Jovovich as Leeloo, learning a 400-word alien language, doing most of her own stunts, and speaking in a secret code only she and Besson understood. Stick around, because once you hear what really went down on set, you'll never watch The Fifth Element the same way again. Luc Besson's obsession with The Fifth Element started long before Hollywood ever noticed him. Born in Paris in 1959, he spent his childhood bouncing around the Mediterranean with his scuba instructor parents, far away from city life and television. Those quiet, isolated days forced him into his imagination, where at just 16, he started writing what would become the foundation for Fifth Element. This wasn't a quick weekend idea. It was a massive 400-page handwritten epic meant to be a trilogy, full of alien civilizations, interplanetary politics, and a spiritual mythology tying for classical elements, earth, air, fire, water, to a mysterious fifth one representing life itself. The Mandashan were conceived as ancient protectors of the elemental stones, while the Mongolers were their violent mercenary rivals. Every weapon, spaceship, and city had a backstory. Even as he became a working filmmaker with hits like Lion, The Professional, he kept refining the story in his spare time. By the early 90s, after the success of Nikita and Lion, he had the clout to pitch it to studios. But the Hollywood machine wasn't buying a sprawling three-part saga with hundreds of characters. Columbia Pictures agreed to finance it only if it became one film. So Besson made the hard call, compress everything into a single, self-contained story. Casting came next, and his first choice for Hero Corbin Dallas was Mel Gibson, but Gibson passed. That opened the door for Bruce Willis, fresh off Die Hard with a vengeance. For the villain Zorg, Besson went straight to Gary Oldman, who had worked with him on Lion. Oldman didn't fully grasp the role, but his performance ended up unforgettable. And then there was Leeloo. Mila Jovovich beat out over 8,000 women for the part, not because of her resume. Her biggest role at the time was Return to the Blue Lagoon, but because Besson thought she looked like she wasn't from Earth. She was the perfect supreme being. What followed was one of the most intense prep periods for any actress. Mila Jovovich trained in martial arts, learned a fully constructed 400-word alien language that she and Besson would use privately, and threw herself into doing almost all her own stunts. By the time cameras rolled in 1996, she was as much Leeloo in real life as she was on screen. Filming The Fifth Element was a constant balancing act between the movie's over-the-top imagination and the gritty, physical reality of shooting it. Besson refused to lean on CGI, even though the late 90s were all about digital spectacle. Instead, he built real sets, used practical effects, and kept computer shots to just 188 across the entire film. The destruction of Diva Plavolagin's stage during the Floston Paradise attack was a one-take sequence with real explosions, fire, and debris flying around the actors. Mila Jovovich ran through that chaos in full costume, dodging time blasts and collapsing set pieces. Even Zorg's all-in-one ZF-1 weapon was partially real, with a working flamethrower that nearly set part of the set on fire during testing. The commitment to doing things for real was both impressive and dangerous. The costumes were just as intense. Jean-Paul Gaultier designed over 1,000 unique outfits, dressing every character, down to the extras, in something distinctive. The Mondo Chuan suits weighed 80 pounds, causing the stunt actors inside to overheat and nearly faint under studio lights. Chris Tucker's leopard print Ruby Road costume was originally meant for Prince, but when Prince saw the designs, he walked away. Tucker took over and brought a completely different energy to the role. Fast-talking, high-pitched, and impossible to ignore. His outfit weighed over 50 pounds and was so restrictive that he couldn't sit between takes. Through all this, Besson's personal life was shifting. He was married to Maywen, who physically played Diva Plavalagina, but as production went on, his relationship with Mila Jovovich deepened. By the time filming ended, his marriage had collapsed, and he and Mila married later that year, only to divorce 2 years later. Despite that drama, the collaboration between them gave Leeloo depth beyond the script. Mila Jovovich wasn't just hitting marks. She was embodying the role with a mix of innocence, strength, and vulnerability. One moment that summed it all up came from a scene that wasn't even meant to be iconic, the multi-pass gag. Midway through the movie, Leeloo presents her ID with wide-eyed sincerity, mispronouncing it as multi-pass. It was part of her character's learning curve, but the way Mila delivered it, half alien, half human, made the crew crack up. Besson kept it in, and audiences loved it. Multi-pass became an instant cult catchphrase, plastered on fan merchandise, cosplay badges, and even referenced in video games and TV shows. That's the kind of lightning-in-a-bottle moment you can't plan. The deeper you go into The Fifth Element, the more you see how much its magic came from risk. Besson refused to follow the dark, metallic look of other 90s sci-fi, and instead went bright, saturated, and absurdly human. Bruce Willis and Gary Oldman never even share a scene, something Besson did on purpose to avoid a predictable hero-villain showdown. He wanted the story to feel like a chain reaction of events, where characters influence each other without direct confrontation. And thematically, you want to contrast everywhere, beauty and chaos, hope and destruction. Leeloo, the ultimate weapon, is also a fragile being learning about humanity's flaws. Diva Plavalagina sings a haunting aria just minutes before being gunned down. It's emotional whiplash, and it works because it mirrors a behind-the-scenes reality. Love, betrayal, creativity, and exhaustion all tangled together. Mila Jovovich news at the time was full of her transformation from model to action star, and Mila Jovovich update stories often focus on her dedication to doing her own stunts and speaking that alien language. But what really set her apart was how much she believed in Leeloo. She wasn't just playing a part. She was carrying the emotional center of a movie that could have easily been just eye candy. And maybe that's why, decades later, people still quote her lines, still cosplay her outfits, and still talk about how The Fifth Element feels like nothing else. The risks, practical stunts, wild costumes, emotional vulnerability paid off. It's rare that a sci-fi film feels both ridiculous and deeply sincere, but this one nailed it, and a huge part of that is Mila Jovovich's performance. So, let's talk about it. Do you think The Fifth Element would have worked with anyone else's Leeloo, or was Mila Jovovich the only one who could pull it off? If you watched the movie recently, you might notice details you missed before, like how the Mondo Shawan's slow movements weren't acting. They were just trying not to pass out in those boiling hot suits. Or how Chris Tucker somehow delivered that mile-a-minute dialogue while wearing a costume that barely let him breathe. Or how Mila Jovovich's martial arts training shows up in tiny moments, like the way she shifts her weight before a fight scene. And then there's the language, over 400 words, built years before the movie, used as a secret code between Mila and Besson. No wonder her performance feels so lived in. The film's visual style wasn't just about looking cool. It was a deliberate rejection of the cold, dystopian futures everyone else was making. The Fifth Element's future is loud, messy, and full of personality. Even the action scenes have a sense of humor, whether it's Corbin Dallas reacting to Leeloo crashing into his taxi or Ruby Road screaming through an alien gunfight. That balance of absurdity and sincerity is why it's still a cult favorite. It's also why the movie's practical effects haven't aged badly. Watching it now, the explosions, miniatures, and costumes still feel real because they were real, and the commitment to doing things in camera meant the actors could actually react to what was happening around them. Mila Jovovich update interviews years later still bring up how exhausting those days were, but also how worth it the work felt when she saw the finished film. If you strip away the wild visuals, the movie is really about connection. Leeloo finding humanity worth saving despite its flaws, Corbin rediscovering purpose, and even side characters like Ruby Road getting swept into something bigger than themselves. It's that heart, hidden under all the chaos, that makes people come back to it. The Fifth Element might be remembered for its fashion and action, but the reason it lasted is because its soul, and Mila Jovovich is at the center of that. Here's something you might not know. Mila Jovovich's white bandage outfit was one of the most comfortable costumes on set, even though it looked like it would fall apart at any moment. Gaultier designed it so she could move freely, which was essential for all her stunt work. Meanwhile, the Mangalore costumes were so heavy and awkward that stunt performers had to rehearse their fight scenes at half speed before filming them full speed. And in Ruby Road's leopard jumpsuit, Tucker had to lean on walls between takes because he couldn't sit in it. Then there's a flamethrower incident with the ZF-1. During a test, the weapon's real flame unit malfunctioned and nearly lit part of the set on fire. The safety crew jumped in immediately, but it shows how committed they were to keeping the effects real. Even the multi-pass line has its own afterlife. Fans still use it at conventions, and you can find on everything from keychains to t-shirts. Mila Jovovich News Stories in Years since often revisit that moment because it perfectly captures what made Leeloo special. A mix of innocence, alienness, and determination. It's the kind of accidental magic that becomes a movie's legacy. And if you're wondering about the Prince connection, imagine how different Ruby Road would have been if he'd taken the role. Besson wrote it for him, but when he saw the costume sketches, he refused. Chris Tucker stepped in and turned it into something entirely his own, adding that manic energy that made the character unforgettable. The fact that so many of these choices were last-minute or risky shows how unpredictable filmmaking can be, and how sometimes the unexpected version becomes a definitive one. And that's why The Fifth Element still stands apart from any other sci-fi movie. It's bright, it's bizarre, and it's got a beating heart under all the spectacle. Mila Jovovich didn't just act in it, she helped shape it into the cult classic it is today. So here's the real question. What's your favorite behind-the-scenes detail from The Fifth Element? Was it the insane costumes, the real explosions, the alien language, or the fact that one of the most famous lines in sci-fi was a happy accident? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you got a favorite Mila Jovovich update moment from her career, let's hear that too. Whether you're here for the fashion, the fights, or the flaming sci-fi shotguns, there's no denying that this movie is still one of a kind.